In our headlines on this Monday afternoon, June 19th, here in South Korea. President Yoon Suk-yeol departs for France this morning to address the International Bureau of Expositions on Tuesday, as Korea's southern port city of Busan hopes to host the 2030 World Expo. Meanwhile, at a major political forum this past weekend, North Korea links its recently failed space mission to a critical defect and vows to launch a successful spy satellite into orbit in the near future. And top diplomats from the U.S. and their Chinese counterparts hold constructive talks in Beijing this past Sunday to address simmering tensions and pledge to leave communication channels open. President Yoon Suk-yeol is poised to make a high-profile pushover in Paris on Tuesday in support of Busan's bid to bring home the 2030 World Expo. Now, this will be followed by a summit with his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron before embarking on a state visit to Vietnam. Our top office correspondent Kim Do-yeon reports.
After much anticipation, the top office finally confirmed that President Yoon Suk-yeol will make his speech to the General Assembly of the Bureau International des Expositions in Paris on Tuesday in English to boost Busan's bid for 2030 World Expo. While it was already announced that Yoon would be in Paris for the BIE meeting, his office has refrained from confirming direct involvement from the president. But with Saudi Arabia's Mohammed bin Salman attending the BIE to push, the top office decided not to hold back anymore. Along with this announcement, the top office also provided more details. The 30-minute presentation is regarded as one of the last opportunities for bidders to convince BIE's 179 member states. The top office also said the presentation will, quote, fill the 30 minutes allotted to it without a dull moment, with videos and presentations telling delegates why Busan should host the expo. The president will be the final speaker following Gangnam-style singer Psy, academics as well as big-name entrepreneurs. Karina of K-pop girl group aespa and soprano Jo Soo-mi will take part virtually. Meanwhile, President Yoon wrote an op-ed in French newspaper Le Figaro last week to share his vision of Seoul-Paris ties. He expressed his commitment to joining hands with France on security issues, including North Korea and the war in Ukraine, saying that rules-based global order and peace are under threat amid intensifying conflict between liberal democracy and authoritarian forces. He said he will work with NATO members, including France, to restore peace in Ukraine, and said he looks forward to working with Paris as South Korea is set for a seat on the United Nations Security Council as a non-permanent member. He also described Busan as a port city where young French soldiers landed during the Korean War to help defend South Korea, and a place that was once filled with war refugees only to become the city with the second largest transshipment volume in the world. As for his overseas trip, President Yoon, after his BIE presentation, will meet with French President Emmanuel Macron before a state visit to Vietnam on Thursday. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Across the border in North Korea, a key political conference that this past weekend made a rare admission of failure with regard to the regime's recent space attempt and vowed to successfully place into orbit a spy satellite in the near future. Our senior foreign affairs correspondent Peun-ji has details.
On May 31st, a North Korean rocket carrying a military spy satellite crashed into the sea soon after liftoff. The failed launch was described as the most serious failure by the North at the ruling party's latest key meeting, with leader Kim Jong-un in attendance. The North state media said Monday that the officials responsible for the launch were criticized and were told to analyze the cause of the failure so that a military reconnaissance satellite can be successfully launched in the near future. But it did not elaborate on when exactly the next launch will take place. An expert told Arirang News that it's not typical for the regime to admit failure and suggested two possible reasons as to why the North may have done this. Firstly, because it's obvious that the launch failed, as South Korea has already retrieved parts of the rocket and the information might have leaked to the North Korean public. And secondly, it needs North Korean scientists to take risks in order to make the regime's space program successful.
The North Korean regime wants to make sure that its own internal scientific apparatus stays committed to constructing these things and building these things and keeps on trying and trying, right? And if the North Koreans' attitude towards failure is that scientists get, purged, or they lose their privileges or whatever if these launches fail, right, then that means you can never admit failure, which means the scientists won't take the necessary chances and risks and stuff like that.
He also added that this is what makes the current Kim Jong-un regime different from the previous regime.
Kim Jong-un is a little bit more aware that these things aren't always going to go smoothly, and he's willing to admit that. And that should help, in the long term, that should help the program be more successful.
배은지, Arirang News.
In Beijing, an almost 8-hour marathon interaction between U.S. and China's diplomats took place this past Sunday as part of efforts to ease tensions. While no concrete consensus was reached, the parties have reportedly agreed to continue communicating. Our Foreign Ministry correspondent Choi Min-jung has more.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has met with his Chinese counterpart Qin Gang in Beijing on a widely anticipated mission to lower the heightened U.S. China tensions. Both sides called Sunday's meeting candid and constructive. In a statement, the U.S. State Department said Blinken stressed the need to reduce the risk of misperception and miscalculation. The State Secretary also made clear that Washington will always work with its allies and partners to advance its vision for a world that is free, open, and upholds the international rules-based order. Meanwhile, China's state media quoted Qin as having pointed out that U.S.-China relations are at their lowest point. Qin remained firm in urging the U.S. to abide by the One China principle and to commit to not supporting Taiwan's independence. Although no major breakthrough was achieved, the two sides noted the importance of facilitating people-to-people exchanges between the two countries. Blinken also invited Qin to Washington to continue their discussions. Blinken's two-day visit makes him Washington's highest-level official to visit China under the Biden administration. It also marks the first visit to China by a U.S. State Secretary in 5 years. Blinken had to delay his visit to China, which had been originally planned for February, due to controversy over an alleged Chinese spy balloon flying over U.S. airspace. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
Material not covered in public education will be excluded from the annual college scholastic ability test, also known as Sunung here in Korea. Now, this intention follows talks between the government and ruling party at the National Assembly on this Monday, during which officials also spoke of seeking ways to enhance the testing format to ensure an appropriate level of difficulty. In particular, Education Minister Lee Joo-ho took issue with the so-called killer questions on material not covered at schools, forcing students to seek often costly private help at cram schools. Separately, the ruling People Power Party and the Yoon administration also agreed to keep open autonomous private foreign language and global high schools, whose status was set to be stripped starting in the year 2025, in line with plans by the former Moon administration. In other news, the government here has reportedly urged the U.S. to clarify its electric vehicle regulations under the Inflation Reduction Act. According to the U.S. government, Seoul is taking issue with the definition of the phrase foreign entity of concern, which currently includes companies associated with the governments of China, Russia, and other states. The issue is that the phrase can be interpreted to include almost all Chinese companies, as no further specification has been made. Seoul has reportedly called on Washington to also take into account the global interdependency of battery supply chains. Under the U.S.'s Inflation Reduction Act, vehicles that use batteries that contain any critical minerals sourced from a foreign entity of concern will be excluded from subsidies from the year 2025. Meanwhile, Koreans are stocking up on the Japanese yen as its value tumbles to its lowest level in 8 years. The combined purchase of the yen at Korea's 4 major banks in May jumped around 5-fold on year. Yen deposits at these banks amounted to nearly 811 billion yen as of last Thursday, 40% higher than at the end of June 2022. This follows the Japanese currency's depreciation to 897.49 Korean won against 100 yen on Monday, its biggest decline since June 2015. Meanwhile, here in Seoul, city officials have issued their first heatwave advisory for this year amid the unusually hot June temperatures. And as our Moon Hae-ryun reports, many other cities are enduring the same scorching phenomenon.
Many countries around the world are sweltering under a June heat wave, and Seoul was the latest to feel the heat. On Sunday, the city was issued with a heatwave warning as temperatures soared to nearly 33 degrees Celsius during the day. It's expected to be even hotter in Seoul on Monday. A heatwave warning is issued when the feels-like temperature of 33 degrees or higher is expected to be recorded across 2 or more days in a row. The government immediately activated its Emergency Operations Center in response to the warning and will be checking in regularly with the elderly and homeless to ensure they are safe and well over the coming days. Other cities around the world were also affected heavily by the heat. Nearly 100 people died in 2 of India's most populous states of Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, according to AP News. A further 154 people in northern India were admitted to hospital with heat-related symptoms. Most of these casualties were people aged over 60 with chronic diseases that were made worse by high temperatures, prolonged exposure, or dehydration. The average high temperature in the area peaked between 40 and 45 degrees, 5 degrees higher and 25% drier than usual as a result of the delayed monsoon season. Mexico City was also hit with its hottest ever recorded June temperature, and Florida was issued a heat advisory on Sunday with temperatures soaring to 42 degrees. The Climate Prediction Center in the United States confirmed earlier in the month that El Niño conditions were present, leading to hot and dry weather in the north and wetter periods in the south of the U.S. El Niño is a climate pattern during which sea surface temperatures are higher than average in the tropical Pacific Ocean, affecting global average temperature. It last occurred in the spring and summer of 2019, but had a fairly weak impact. The European Union's Copernicus Climate Change Service reported that while there is still uncertainty about how strong the event will be this year, El Niño conditions are certainly underway. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
Back on the local front, Korea's Hwasong City has installed safety barriers at pedestrian crossings within school zones to discourage jaywalking and reduce related accidents. Our Yoon has more.
This is a crosswalk in front of an elementary school in Hwasong City. When the pedestrian light turns red, people cannot walk into the street because of a barrier that closes to stop them. When the light turns green again, the barrier is raised for the people to cross. This is a smart school zone pedestrian safety system. Artificial intelligence has been incorporated to not only operate the barriers according to the traffic lights, but the barrier also provides audio assistance. This system has been installed particularly around school zones to prevent traffic accidents caused by children jaywalking.
The children see the barrier and become more careful when crossing the street. As a parent, it's a relief.
This system has been installed at 36 crosswalks in front of elementary schools around Hwasong City. Data from 7 of these crosswalks show the number of jaywalking cases has dropped from 141 before the installment to 4 afterward, a decrease of 96%.
A 96% decrease in jaywalking means this system is efficient. We will be adding 10 more installments this year.
Hwasong City will use the feedback from the current trial operation of the AI crosswalk barrier system and make any necessary improvements before starting normal operation. It's hoped that the safety system may then be actively introduced to other local governments. Yoon, Arirang News.
Researchers here are exploring the realm of blind locomotion in robots, which they believe may facilitate disaster missions where vision may be limited or absent altogether. Our Changwon-ju explains.
A 4-legged robot wearing an eye patch walks up the stairs. This dream walker is unable to see as it has no cameras or laser imaging detection and ranging LiDAR sensors, but still it moves effortlessly. The robot can manage all different kinds of movements even though it only has inertial and joint sensors attached to it. The newly developed robot moves by imagining terrain information. Made possible because 1,000 robots practiced movement through reinforcement learning in various simulated environments. The developed technology can be also directly applied to various types of robots.
There are differences between hardware and simulation, but we train the robots in various environments.
The Dreamwalker robot operates by determining which of the previously learned environments is similar to any road surface it encounters for the first time. The reaction speed is also very fast at 1,000th of a second.
The robot can be initially confused when entering new surroundings, but it will imagine the most similar environment among everything it has learned so far, and will transfer control inputs that fit the environment it surmised.
The research team hopes the developed robot will be utilized to perform missions in disasters such as fires, as it can walk stably without being affected by external conditions. Chung Eun-ju, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. Efforts by a number of African nations to end the war in Ukraine have been dismissed by Kyiv and Moscow. Leaders and representatives from countries including South Africa, Egypt, Senegal and Zambia failed to convince Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to begin peace negotiations. During talks in St. Petersburg on Saturday, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa presented Putin with a 10-point peace initiative. But Putin largely dismissed the plan and accused Ukraine of being unwilling to talk. Zelensky also rebuffed the proposal, saying in a meeting the previous day that negotiations would just, quote, freeze the war. The war has heavily impacted Africa, as exports of grain from Ukraine and fertilizer from Russia have been restricted, increasing global food insecurity. In Uganda, burials took place on Sunday for 42 people killed in a suspected rebel attack on Friday night on a school near the Congo border. The attackers killed 38 students, 3 civilians and a school guard. Local officials suspect that another 6 students might have been abducted. The attack has been blamed on the Islamic State-linked Allied Democratic Forces. The attackers used guns and machetes and set fire to a dormitory, burning those inside beyond recognition. The ADF is accused of launching a number of attacks against civilians over the past few years in remote areas of the country. Most recently, it was blamed for an attack in March that killed 19 people. Turning over to the United Kingdom, where the Trooping the Colour Parade returned over the weekend, led for the very first time by King Charles III. The monarch joined 1,500 soldiers, 300 horses, and hundreds of musicians marching from Buckingham Palace to Horse Guards Parade in St. James Park. Although the parade is held every year, it was the first time in over 4 decades that a monarch has ridden on horseback in the procession. The event is a royal tradition, publicly celebrating the birthday of the British sovereign. UK monarchs typically have 2 birthdays, with the real birthday celebrated in private and the other celebrated by the public in warmer weather. King Charles III's actual birthday is in November. And finally, Brussels wrapped up its annual Pedal Boat World Championship this weekend. The event took place over 2 Sundays in the Belgian capital, officially starting on June 11th. Teams tried to complete as many laps as they could in 4 hours around a 420-meter circuit at a lake in the Bois de la Cambre Park. 22 teams took part this year, mainly from Belgium, but also with some teams from Spain, France and England. The winning team managed to complete a total of 54 laps. Competitors wore colorful costumes with themes such as Where's Waldo, Pirates and the 80s. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. What a sweltering weekend and start to the new week. The season's first heat wave advisory was issued on Sunday in Seoul, and Yangyang in Gangwon-do province had tropical nights over the weekend as the overnight temperatures stayed above 25 degrees Celsius. While tropical nights in June started last year, and even this year's first tropical night came 10 days earlier than the previous year. And of course, strong sunshine today means no relief from the heat. UV rays will be very high and ground level ozone is rising during the day. So please try to avoid outdoor activities during the hottest parts of the day and drink plenty of water even though you don't feel thirsty. Meanwhile, eastern regions in Gyeongju, Daegu, and Gangneung, which had simmering heat over the weekend, are having welcome relief this afternoon. Well, but relief is on the way with rain that's starting tomorrow in southern regions, which will gradually spread nationwide on Wednesday. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
And those are the headlines at this hour. We have our panel session coming up next, so do stay with us. Thank you for now.